Hello and welcome to another episode of Room for Thought. I'm Douglas Carswell and joining me today is the broadcaster and political commentator, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Julia, thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. You are, as I said, a radio presenter. You are a political commentator. You are perfectly perched, if I can put it that way, to tell us about what's going on in politics.
Does
what is
anyone
going
know?
on?
What is that? No, good question. What is going on? I think the key thing of what's going on, it's not about realignment of parties from, a two-party country to a four-party or five-party or six-party country. And I don't think it's really so much a battle about Remain and Leave anymore. I think this is about the battle between people who believe in democracy and people who don't. I think this is the British people saying, you know what? It turns out you've not been listening to us for all these years. You've been doing all this stuff without our permission, and you're treating us like we're idiots. And you know what? We're not sure you have been making the right decisions on our behalf, and we don't like being treated like idiots, and we'd like it to stop. That was what I think the 2016 Brexit vote was about. And that was quite a lot about what the 2017 vote was about. It was what the European election vote might have been about as well. And I think those votes are going to continue to be about that message from ordinary people, whether they're living on a council estate in Stoke-on-Trent or whether they're living in a nice little middle-class house in Islington. But people just saying, do you know what? I would like my politicians, I would like my government, I would like the opposition to be representative of what people actually want rather than what they think is the right thing for us because, well, they know better, don't they?
Do you almost think that perhaps with digital, people have woken up to the fact that all these MPs are actually pretty tin-eared when it comes to connecting with the public, but they've got a safe seat, so a job for life. Civil servants, rubbish at making public policy, but 20 or 30 years ago, they were good at taking civil service exams. In broadcasting, you've got all these public service broadcasters who don't really understand the country that they're reporting about. Do you think that we can now see this? We can see how rubbish they largely are.
The fact that everyone was so completely shocked by the 2016 referendum result. I mean, one of my favourite things is that I got an image on my iPad of the BBC newsroom in the morning, sort of around 7, 8 a.m. When they were reporting, still, after 4 hours, Brexit had been voted for. And you could see these shell-shocked journalists just sort of, but I don't know anyone who voted Leave, so how could this possibly have happened? No, exactly. Of course you don't know anyone who voted Leave. You work at the BBC. But that's it. I mean, and again, the political classes, I'm willing to accept that actually your average MP spends more time with, awful thing, ordinary people than the average journalist living in that Westminster.
I know as an MP you have to.
Yeah, because you have your constituency meetings and you have people coming in with their problems and you have to meet people and know what they're talking about. But there has just been this idea that we know better. And again, it's that idea that I think that people are really sort of, and that's the EU's idea. The EU knows better than the government of any nation state, and they know better than the people. And we've had that attitude right now, the people saying that, look, if Parliament doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, Parliament knows better and it would be a devastating blow to the country. Well, what if the people are quite happy, whether they don't believe it'll be a devastating blow or they don't care whether it is, they're willing to take the risk.
Well, they just don't trust the people telling them this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just fundamentally, this idea that the people are sovereign. Everyone seems to have forgotten that.
Yeah. Now, do you support the Leave campaign in the referendum?
I absolutely did. I was broadcasting on Talk Radio at the time, and we'd actually just launched in March 2016. Good timing. But of course, because of Ofcom rules, very strict rules on broadcasting, I'm not allowed to support any particular side on air. I'm known as a leaver, and certainly outside of those purdah periods, I can be very open about that. But I don't have a party political.
Are you still surprised that 3 years on we're still in it?
I'm annoyed at myself as a cynical old hack. I'm 51 years old. I've been in political journalism for more than 2 decades. Sorry. You'd think that I would be a bit more cynical. It pains me to admit that it didn't occur to me for one moment, that if there was a victory for Leave in 2016, that it wouldn't be enacted.
You just assumed we were a democracy and they would do what the people wanted.
But of course, I had a leaflet that cost £9.3 million of taxpayers' money from David Cameron telling me that the result would be implemented. I have to say, I don't still have my own leaflet because I did rip it up, put it in an envelope and post it back to number 10 because I objected to my money being spent on what was basically propaganda. But yeah, no, I am really shocked by it. And I think the British people are really shocked by it. And it's extraordinary how many Remainers, people I know who voted Remain, some of them Eurosceptic, they're sort of, well, on balance, I don't want to take the risk, but I don't like a lot of the EU. But how many of those people now say, if there were a second referendum, God forbid, they would vote leave because they think it's a travesty of democracy and natural justice, that it's not being delivered?
I think it's quite disturbing how, since the referendum 3 years ago, it's almost as if there's been a culture war waged by the cultural and intellectual elites. Yeah. I look at some of the output of the BBC, I look at what certain academics have been saying, how previously sensible commentators have become almost deranged. Yeah. And they're stirring up a culture war against the majority of their own citizens.
If I read one more time or hear another interview in which we're told, but the average Leave voter wasn't university educated, they're old, they're all dying off, they're bigoted, they're ignorant about things. Again, I sit there thinking, not sure I'm any of those things, but I managed to be a Leave voter. I mean, my family split down the middle, seriously Remain and seriously Brexit. So we've had some good battles at home on that one. It's very strange. And I don't think the people who are making those arguments, the stupid people didn't know what they were voting for. And we were all mesmerised by the power of this big red bus and what was written on its side, and we were lied to and all of that. I don't think they realise how incredibly insulting that is to people. That
it's almost like the communists who used to say that people had a false consciousness.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But again, what I find fascinating is if you vote the right way. So, for instance, if when there is like a referendum in Republic of Ireland on on gay marriage, and it's wonderful, strong vote for progressive values and equal rights for gay people to marry, and then you see, this is the wisdom of the crowd. Aren't these people wonderful? This is this is where you can defeat the establishment of the Catholic Church because ordinary people do the right thing. Oh, except if you vote the wrong way, when you're all stupid and ignorant and fascist and bigoted and prejudiced and you believe what was written on a bus. So it's this judgment that when it's in their interest, the people know best. And when it's not, then the people are stupid.
What's interesting about that is it doesn't occur to them that actually the liberal, educated, sensible option could actually be to not have your country run by a group of unelected technocrats.
Well, that's a mad idea that's never going to catch on, is it? Yeah, I think the big divide in this country pre-2016 and since is actually optimist or pessimist. The number of people who tweet me particularly or talk to me in the street who are Remainers, who have this incredibly negative view of our country. Not only should we
can't cope unless
Yes, but not only should we be ashamed of our colonial past, we should be ashamed of being 90% white. We should just be ashamed of the country was in dire straits before we joined the EU, and thank God for the EU, they've saved us from ourselves, and we have no economic future, no one cares about us, we haven't got any industry, we're dying as a country, and thank God the EU are willing to have us and take us in, in our rags and our bare feet, and give us a crust of bread. I mean, that's the sort of attitude. Whereas most Leavers I know, and certainly this is where I come from, and I think it's where you come from as well, I'm not a Leaver because I want to go back to the 1950s. A, I wasn't alive then. B, actually, there's a lot of things wrong with
life
this country in the 1950s.
Pretty dull and grim.
And sexist and racist and homophobic and all the other things.
No Netflix, no Spotify.
How would we cope? So I want to go forward. My view of Brexit is because I am incredibly proud of my country, and not just our hard power, but our soft power, our language and our culture, and all the technological and industrial innovation that we've had over the years. We've been we punch well above our weight in the global world. Have done for centuries, and will continue to do so. And so my view of Brexit is about us being this global power and us being a proud independent nation state. And there's nothing Little Englander about it, but there's crucially, it's about having a positive vision and a belief in our country and a belief in our people and our education system and our innovation and our entrepreneurial spirit.
Has being a Brexit supporter cost you any friendships? Are there times when people that you've been close to, difference of opinion, you've noticed you've slightly drifted?
Well, I've been accused of radicalising my husband, who got very staunch Brexit, having lived with me. There were a few family members with whom I think we just felt it was easier for a few months not to be involved. Now, although I wasn't a campaigner for Leave officially, I think though I did a few question times and quite high profile on Twitter.
I remember you were a very effective advocate.
Yeah, and so I think there were quite a few people who felt that if I'd swung even a few thousand votes, that I'd been bad for the country. Certainly, the only friend I have fallen out with was actually only a few months ago. But I just couldn't keep up the sort of being talked to as if, well, I thought you were a nice person. I thought you were a clever person. But it turns out you're supporting Leave. And of course, all the illegality and all the criminality and the side of the bus thing. And I just couldn't keep it up. I couldn't keep up the politeness anymore. But as a general rule, as you know, Leavers don't fall out with people because they disagree with them. I have found Remainers don't either. Remoaners do.
I know that I think there are definitely two types of Remainers.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of people I know who voted to Remain because they feared change, they believed what David Cameron and George Osborne were telling them about the economy.
Or they believe in the EU, they really do.
Yeah. And there's a sort of honesty and honourable case for the UK's membership. But what I find really extraordinary is a certain kind of Remainer who just simply won't accept the legitimacy of the results or the...
and they've gone through different arguments. It was only 52%. The side of the bus.
It was the Russians.
It was the Russians. There was someone who gave too much money to the Believe account, and it was some teenage guy who'd been a design student who won it. And they're going through every different option, every single option, and they'll go. They won't stop.
I think there's a dishonesty in their arguments, and they know that they're being dishonest, and they know that we know, and yet, like a small child, they're still doing it.
But they come from that belief that they're good people, you see. And one of my favourite things to do on social media is when someone with the hashtag FBPE, which follow back pro Europe, and all of the citizen.
I wondered what that meant.
Citizen of nowhere, or I don't know, all of the different things, the EU flag, all of the different hashtags, and they'll tweet me some absolutely vile, unpleasant, nasty abuse, and I always retweet and say to my followers, remember. They're the good people. They're the nice people, and I just don't see it on the other side. And I think actually Leave voters have been, I would say, 99% remarkably well behaved and sanguine in the face of
pretty restrained.
Very restrained in the face of the 3 years of being told that we're bad people.
What I think, if you look at politics more generally, rather than Brexit for a moment, if you take a broader picture of politics. It's almost as if politics is being turned inside out, by which I mean the outsiders, people like Jeremy Corbyn, Nigel Farage, they're becoming the insiders. And there are an awful lot of career politicians, career insiders, who I think at the next election might find themselves out completely. Why do you think it is that the people who do politics for a living have proved to be so bad at it, so bad at capturing this mood of public unrest?
Isn't it partly because the people, and there are an awful lot of MPs who've done this, but particularly I think on the Labour side, this is a big thing, where you leave university, you work in a policy unit, you work maybe for
you become a special advisor.
Yes, but you work in sort of equalities in a trade union, so you haven't done the shop floor stuff. And then a special advisor, and then you become an backbench MP, you work your way up, and it's basically about sort of it's basically licking the bottom of the person.
You're rewarded for being obsequious.
Yeah,
you suck up,
and they haven't. It's very different, I think, that from going into politics at a later age, having done a job. Maybe some people made no money or been successful in a career, or I think you've been a teacher or a cab driver. We've got lawyers or whatever, and then to say, do you know what? I want to do something more. This is a problem, and I think that I'm somebody who can help change things, and I'm going to go into politics to do this specific thing or change an attitude and to have a purpose, rather than I quite fancy being a politician as a career, which I think is a strange thing.
You're so right. The number of times
when I was established that as a thing.
The number of times, should we just stop there?
Yeah.
The number of times I listen to a politician saying that they care passionately about something, and I ask myself, did they care about this phenomenon when they first went into politics, or did they want to go into politics, want to see the letters MP off their name, and they fish around for things to feign concern about? And I think that's the problem with politics.
And I think that's where voters perhaps can start seeing three people. And that's the interesting thing, actually, is a lot of the media class and the political class find it very strange that there are people who, like Jeremy Corbyn, who Magic Grandpa, Nigel Farage, and Widdecombe, people like that. And you think, well, why on earth would these people be popular? And the general
they believe in something.
They believe in something, but also they tell it like it is, and they don't mind offending people. It's this feeling that people are true and honest. And we all have it. We have friendships like that. We have family relationships like that, where you can say, look, I don't agree with you, but at least I know where you stand. And I think that's the feeling from a lot of voters. It's this sort of oily, well-turned-out politician who's saying the right things, depending on what the manifesto says this week, and that feeling that you're being treated as a fool.
I was reading a tweet by a prospective Tory parliamentary candidate the other day, and they were saying they were passionate about politics because they wanted improved public services and a pro-enterprise economy. And I thought to myself, hang on, there's a boilerplate soundbites.
And I like apple pie.
Who's against that?
Yeah.
What they really mean, I think, is that they want to feel important and they're willing to learn the magic code in Westminster to say the right cliches in order to get in.
Well, I'm just amazed that being an MP is something people desire to do anymore. I very seriously considered politics, but I've yet to find a political party that I could fully sign up to.
I was a member of one or two, but
you've done it, yes.
like you, I can never find one I agree
You're
with.
You're not quite in sugar and butter territory.
Even when I was in a parliamentary party with a single MP in the House of Commons, we had ferocious disagreements.
No, but that's the thing. I am genuinely one of those floating voters. I don't necessarily always vote on the winning side, but more often than not. But I am somebody who, when I actually look at sort of the polling on what people think about, say, for instance, criminal justice or public services or taxation or education, whatever it is, I tend to be, I would say 90% of topics, right slap in the middle. But there isn't a political party right now which represents my views on that and that and that and that. And I just figured I wouldn't be any good at being my biggest fault, those awful, like, what's your biggest fault at a job interview? Far too honest, brutally honest. I would last about 5 minutes.
You would forget what dishonest soundbite you had to say to what question.
I'm a terrible liar. I'm really bad at lying.
Now, let's put a bit of perspective on our politics. I mean, I think generally speaking, for a Western country, we've been pretty well run over the years. The broader, every time we've had a national crisis, World War I, we managed to produce Lloyd George. World War II, we managed to produce a Churchill. Post-war, we managed to produce an Attlee. 1970s, we're a country in decline, we produced a Thatcher. Where's the Thatcher or the Churchill now?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Well, saying someone's ideological now is considered to be a fault, isn't it? Whereas actually, you think, I mean, Margaret Thatcher, I wasn't a fan of Margaret Thatcher. I came from a Labour family.
Julia, but...
and I have to say, no, she left office in 1990 when I was at university, and I remember calling my tutor and saying, I need to come late because I want to see her cry when she leaves Downing Street. I was very... It's only in years later, you're looking at me so disappointed.
I'm appalled.
It's only in the years later that I became aware of quite how much she had done and how many things she did. I think she got a lot of things wrong, but I'd say overall, thank God.
I think she's the best leader this country's ever had.
And in terms of the long-term, and also the fact that, of course, when Tony Blair did come in, he barely changed a thing. So even though the Labour Party had been so critical, they barely changed a thing.
She had changed the way the country thought. Yeah. It made it impossible. And then, of course, you have people like George Osborne doing, in effect, socialist things at the Treasury. It paves the way for Corbynism. Because they've undone the
Labour
light.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Well, I think we certainly moved the Overton window on a lot of those issues in recent years.
Smashed the Overton window.
My biggest worry is the belief in democracy. And you say, one of the good things about what's been happening, despite what's happened 3 years on, still it would feel right now no closer to delivering the Brexit vote. And we don't have people rioting on the streets. We've had some people being a bit rude to Anna Soubry outside the House of Commons, and we've had a couple of milkshakes thrown. But overall, we haven't had riots on the streets every weekend like the French have been seeing.
We're not the Yellow Vests.
Yes,
we're not France.
We're not the French.
And to be honest, there were a couple of Wallies who put on yellow vests around Westminster, and I think they got jeered.
But exactly, we are a civilised country, and it's quite clear that the British people have said, that's okay, you do what you're going to do, we'll have our say at the ballot box. And they waited to European elections, and they will wait again. If there's a second referendum or general election in the next few years, well, it has to be by 2022, they will have their say. But I think also crucially, there has been this big change in terms of attitudes towards capitalism. And I think the biggest failing the Tories have had in the last 10 years or so is their absolute abject refusal to defend capitalism. The only time we hear about business now is when you hear about, Sir Philip Green on his yacht while pensioners at BHS are losing money. You don't hear about the fact that capitalism, and I'm a welfare capitalist. I believe in capitalism in markets to create wealth, and then I believe in a relative level of redistribution to help the people at the very bottom. But it is absolutely extraordinary how people are not defending the creation of wealth anymore, celebrating the creation of wealth. And if the Tories aren't doing that, then who is doing this? This constant, look, yes, they messed up in 2007 and 8, absolutely. But I would say, to be honest with you, regulators, the government was more to blame for that, because they shouldn't have let it happen. But this banging on about constant talk about inequality and social redistribution and the like, without talking about the need to create a pie and a cake that's big enough that you can redistribute, is insane.
Do you think sometimes those on the centre-right make the mistake of confusing the free market with the interests of big business?
Yes.
Because big business doesn't actually like the free market.
Which is why they like the EU.
And big banks, for example, they like all that quantitative easing. Big producers, they like the EU because it can create regulations that shut out their competition.
But we shouldn't be down on small business or big business and seeing these people as bad. I used to do phone-ins on the radio, and I remember once there was something about how all big business and how people hate their bosses and how unhappy they are. And I said, what's your relationship with your boss like? Because I've had a few bosses in my time I've not been that keen on, but I know an awful lot of people, including my husband, who run small businesses. And I said, this is not the relationship that I see. And the stories people were telling me about bosses, giving them paid time off, for 6 months for an illness or a family death, for helping them out, buying a car, helping them with school things for their kids. The relationship that most people have with bosses, this idea, this them and us idea that comes from the socialist idea, there's people exploiting, there are people.
And people don't have their own agency, and they need to have those relationships managed for them. And this constant view
of people as victims, whether it's women who are forced to work part-time because they're nasty husbands make them look after the children. Really? Is that what happens in most households? It doesn't happen in most I know. And I do think that the Tories have got tied down into this. They've basically marched onto Labour territory, and they're not making their own case for why this is why we think the world works like this, and what we could do to make it work better, as opposed to marching onto Labour territory and thinking that they can be a version of Labour. And part of that is the whole capitalism bad, socialism good thing, which is where it is extraordinary that someone could be the leader of the opposition party in this country and pose in front of photographs of Stalin and Lenin and Mao, and the country doesn't.
And some of these people are mass murderers. Then
a different scale from Hitler. Now, if anyone posed on the right with a picture of Hitler, they would quite rightly be out of polite society, and yet there's still this. The Tories, I think, the right have allowed this narrative to come up that the left are good and the right are practical. I would have thought that being practical was good.
And also, I think you're right that the case for the free market is not just that it works, that it delivers faster growth.
It's the only thing that works.
It's morally superior to redistribution.
In terms of delivering people out of poverty. And again, this comes back to that idea of pessimism and optimism. This view that the country is more unequal, everyone's living in poverty, everyone's having a horrible time.
Actually, inequality is falling.
Has fallen. But look around. Our notion of poverty now is someone who can't afford an iPhone. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I was explaining to a group of 10-year-olds the other day that when I was their age, phone calls were prohibitively expensive.
Clothes.
I grew up in Central Africa. There was no television. And when you wanted to make a phone call, you would have to book with the post office a line, and it would cost an absolute fortune. Now, of course, 10-year-olds yabber away on Facebook to their cousins on the other side of the planet, and it's virtually. I've got an Italian friend who flies to and fro between here and Italy for 30 quid. I mean, it's extraordinary.
I mean, the world has changed immeasurably, and it's not just the first world that's doing well out of capitalism. The developing world is also.
And it's the free market doing it.
It's the free market, and there is no one defending that. The average view of someone on the left now of how the world is in terms of I mean, Hans Rosling's done these amazing polls of people, and it tells you everything. They think that everyone's still having 8 children, and 4 of them are dying, and before the age of 5, and that 80% of the world is illiterate, and everyone's living in mud huts. They're completely out of touch with how ordinary people are living in almost everywhere in the world, apart from some of the poorest countries in Africa. And there's this negative view and this total lack of factual basis in their opinion.
In the 1980s, I remember looking at the television in the UK, and it was full of pictures of Bob Geldof appealing for charity to help starving Ethiopians. You realise since the year 2000, the second fastest growing economy on the planet has been Ethiopia, and they're doing phenomenally well. And I think we need to slightly update our view of the world. And I think if we did that, we might come to appreciate actually that our own country hasn't got this right to be top dog forever unless we can adapt and embrace the free market a little bit more openly.
But again, isn't it? And again, it's not about being top dog necessarily. It's about being able to make the most of the opportunities that are going to be out there, isn't it?
Totally. I think you're absolutely right. Now, one thing that I think is definitely happening is as this political and cultural and intellectual elite begins to fear the extent to which they become detached from the concerns of the rest of the country, as they've retreated into this echo chamber, they become quite censorious.
Yes. Well, we see a lot of that these days.
And it started in universities, this concept of no platforming, that if someone says something or is likely to say something that challenges the orthodox opinion, just don't let them onto campus.
Yeah.
It's migrated out of universities. You've had some experience of no platforming. Tell us what happened.
Oh, I have to say, it was a very, very, very unpleasant experience. And I was invited to speak, not to give a speech, but to join in a question time style panel at the Royal College of General Practitioners, mainly because I've written and commentated on NHS issues for many years. In fact, I've hosted a couple of NHS conferences. And quite apart from that, as an aside, my mum was a GP. In fact, my father was a special advisor in the Department of Health. God,
so you've got a long-standing interest.
I've got a long-standing interest and knowledge about that field. And also I've interviewed people from the Royal College of GPs many times. And then a very, very left-wing Corbynista, full-on Ramona, a doctor, decided to do a little bit of offence archaeology, as Toby Rowland always calls it, Toby Young calls it, and looked through some past tweets of mine, found a 3-year-old tweet of mine, which was part of a longer conversation, some of which has been deleted by the other half, so I can't remember, 3 years ago, a tweet about Enoch Powell, and it was a conversation about Enoch Powell, and the tweet that I sent, which has was deemed too offensive to allow me to have a platform at the Royal College of GPs, was a tweet that read something along the lines of, it began with, fair point, because I was responding to someone else, I'm not defending Enoch Powell, but I can't see anything he got wrong in his speech. Now, this was a comment about what he was predicting in his speech. That was what I was commenting on. The original tweet to which I was responding has disappeared, so I can't show that. However, I began the tweet with the words, I'm not defending Enoch Powell. And then this was written up in Pulse magazine, a GP's magazine, and quoted by the Royal College of General Practitioners, and used in a petition organised by a very, very, very militant left-wing Corbynista Remainer to say that I was totally unsuitable, I was a racist, xenophobe, whatever, and I should not be allowed to be on a panel. But despite the fact that this tweet began with the words, I'm not defending Enoch Powell, the claim on the headlines was, journalist no platform for defending Enoch Powell. I thought I was having a nuanced conversation, stupid me, on Twitter, about things that he'd predicted in terms of cultural difficulties, people being able to actually assimilate in large numbers, and the backlash and the racial tensions, riots and things that would happen. And that's what I thought I was talking about. All of my other comments in public and in private, on social media, on the radio, articles I've written, would show that I'm not a racist, not a xenophobe at all, far from it. But no, I'm now deemed someone not worthy of attending the Royal College of General Practitioners.
I mean, it takes, I think, 4, 5, maybe 6 years to train to become a fully qualified doctor. What I find so alarming about not allowing you on the platform is this assumption that somehow all these doctors are going to be contaminated by things you might say.
But again, it's also the idea that you wouldn't look at both sides. I mean, genuinely, as I pointed out to them, you were talking, I don't know what it was, a 15-word tweet. You've deliberately only quoted the 7 words, but not the keywords before. Yeah. I think when someone actually writes a tweet saying, I'm not defending Powell, to then actually say, journalist defends Powell, I find a little bit risible. I personally, I don't want to be treated by any of these doctors. I have to say, it was a really unpleasant affair. I have spent the last few years as quite a strong campaigner on freedom of speech issues, and I don't think you should platform people or censor people because you don't agree with or like or approve of what they say, or even think that what they say is true or not. And I think that we should be debating people, and again, if someone wants to deny the Holocaust, well, look, we know you're stupid. You're probably anti-Semitic. But let's debate you and let's show you all the evidence to prove that you're wrong. And we'll do it in the public domain, and then we'll move on after we've made our case. And I find the idea that because you don't like something someone says, or you've taken something out of context and therefore they should be thrown out of polite society, I think that's terrifying. And it is, as everyone keeps saying, but it is true. It is Orwellian.
We need people in politics who can speak for those millions of people, ordinary people living across suburban Britain. Yeah. And yet at the same time, we have this increasingly censorious, narrow, groupthink political class. Now, that is what creates the space for these insurgent outsiders.
That's the key thing. On my local paper, when I started out in the mid-90s, on East London Advertiser of Bethnal Green, and we had the very first BNP councillor elected in the country. And I used to spend at least one day, a fortnight, meeting with this councillor and his acolytes. And not a very pleasant character at all. Interestingly, not re-elected. Why? Because they're no good and people see through them. But there was a big debate about whether or not, even then in the early 90s, about whether or not we should not cover this person. We should not talk about them and just pretend they don't exist. And I said, I think that's insane. I think what you do is you talk about their policies, you get them to explain their views, and you expose them. And we saw that with Nick Griffin when he went on Question Time. And he was totally exposed for just frankly being an idiot, let alone a racist idiot. So I'm very much of the view that you should expose and debate and use it as an intellectual exercise to make your own arguments. But yeah, I think it's very worrying because when you tell people, again, we might decide, we don't want to hear someone who's openly anti-Semitic. Jews should all die. Do we want to hear from that person? Not really. But I think it's better we know what they're saying than that they're keeping it quiet. But then the people who say we shouldn't hear from that person is also the person who's saying that because I don't think we should have free movement of people from any country in the world or the EU, I'm a racist. Well, they would no platform me as well, despite the fact that my view is backed up not just by every Leave voter, but an awful lot of Remain voters as well. So when it's who gets to decide what is and what is not acceptable speech, because we have had 52% of this country being told they're xenophobic and racist and ignorant and prejudiced and all of those things. And who gets to decide that? So simply wanting to have some control on the numbers of people coming to our country is racist.
I mean, I'm a great believer in the free market, and particularly the free market of ideas. And I think if you allow good ideas to combat bad ideas, the bad ideas get driven out.
Yes.
If you intervene in the market of ideas, like intervening in any market system, one of the consequences is that you allow the bad to remain in the marketplace.
Yeah. And by definition, the good ideas will win out if they are backed up by good morality and good sense and the facts. And that's the thing, we haven't seen the rise of the very far right as we've seen in other European countries.
One thing I do fear is that British politics, ironically, as we leave the European Union, becomes Europeanized. We end up with a situation like in France where you've got Macron, a sort of bland, managerialist, technocratic centrist.
All things to all men.
Yeah. And you've got this sort of hideous alternative in the form of the Front National. And I can see that, and then of course even worse, a large section of the population feels the only way they can have their voice heard is to burn cars.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, that's where we're going to head.
Yeah, absolutely. And when people refer to the former UKIP party as a fascist party, the Brexit party as a fascist party, routinely refer to Nigel Farage as a fascist. And you just think, I just shake my head in horror because
he's a classical free market liberal.
No, exactly, and I know him very well, and he just is. He just isn't. But when you do that, and again, these words start losing their meaning because what do you actually call the real fascist? But also that if you just start labelling everybody with whom you disagree as a bad person, and then people don't feel they can speak out. Yeah. Then those feelings will come out some other way. I would always rather know if someone was worried about something, anxious about something. If someone genuinely feels, when I look at a group of young, black men on the street, I feel anxious. Well, don't tell them they can't say that. Say, well, why do you feel that? Well, my impression is that black people commit more crime or something. That's what I see on the news. You can discuss it. You can discuss the issues about, whether is it more black people committing crime, or is it more white? And you can discuss it and use the facts, talk about people's perceptions, and that's how you tackle it.
If you demonise certain opinions, you create demons.
Yeah. And we've seen that being done.
an American friend of mine said to me several months ago that they would never forgive the US political process for forcing them to choose between Trump and Hillary.
Yeah.
And my great fear is that one future election, I might be forced to choose between sort of Corbynism and Nigel Farage. I mean,
I know where I go.
Well,
Yeah.
as a last resort, I do too.
Yeah.
But I rather want free. Well, a spectrum of choice.
The thing is, we don't have a presidential system, so it is, some ways we have one almost by default sometimes. I don't think it is going to come to that. I mean, everyone's saying right now, oh, politics has changed. You say it's more European. We're going to have all these different political parties and things. Well, everyone said that after 2010, and then 2015 we saw that majority government for Cameron.
Yes.
And then 2017, what was it? 83% of people voted for either Labour or the Tories. The point is, people will vote for the party that best represents their views. If you would like to have a government that best represents, you have to vote for one.
Maybe in order to prevent this sort of Corbynism versus Farageism divide in politics, maybe the Conservative Party's got this last opportunity. If they choose someone who is not a middle-of-the-road technocratic managerialist, who would you prefer to see leading the Tory party?
I think as a leaver, on balance, I'm not a Tory member, so I don't have a vote. On balance, I would have wanted Dominic Raab, who got knocked out of the race after the second ballot. Mainly because we know for a fact he was standing up for Britain against the EU, because we've seen the behind-the-scenes documentary of Michel Barnier, the EU chief negotiator, complaining about him. That's good enough for me.
But there's that extraordinary moment where, in effect, it seems that Raab went out to Brussels, played hardball and said, we're not budging, and if you don't agree, this is on you. And then Downing Street
Ollie Robbins
appears to have then allegedly said, actually pay no attention to Raab.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite extraordinary.
And that's what happened to David Davis as well, and he was Brexit Secretary. Yeah, so in terms of someone who would be willing to deliver and do whatever is necessary to deliver Brexit, and therefore the willingness to go to a no-deal Brexit, suspend Parliament if necessary, on October 31st, I think, as two fingers up to the establishment saying you can't do that, I would have gone for him if he'd been the option. I'd love him to be someone like Chancellor, as someone who could deliver on that. But I think having a Ramona Chancellor and a Remainer Prime Minister for the last 3 years has not been good for our Brexiteering efforts. In terms of the candidates remaining, Rory Stewart, absolutely not. I was very glad Sam Gyimah stepped out. Good to know that he's in favour of a second referendum. At least he's honest.
It's good ideas, bad ideas being driven out by good ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah. In terms of trust, I mean, Jeremy Hunt, continuity remain.
Do you think so?
Continuity may. I absolutely think so. Very competent, great foreign secretary. Perfect job for him. Michael Gove, again, fantastic campaigner for Leave. I just think he seems to be so caught up with the idea of sort of making good for being involved in bringing down the Tories with the Leave campaign and the like, and bringing down David Cameron. I would have him in any cabinet, whatever political party I was in, delivering. I think he was a superb education secretary, caught up by the green blob on environment, so a bit worried there, but great justice secretary as well. Would I trust that he would deliver a Leave that I was a Leave voter would recognise as Leave? Right now, I've got question marks. Sajid Javid, very good man. Like him a lot. Not sure he's necessarily as inspiring as some others. But I think, look, we all know we're going to end up with Boris Johnson. I've never drunk the Boris Johnson Kool-Aid. I for years, and I was, working on, the London Evening Standard, around the time, that he was thinking of running for mayor. It's that bizarre thing where you're sort of watching, almost like watching a film, and everyone's going, "Oh my God, this film is amazing," and you're saying, "What is everyone else seeing and hearing that I'm missing? What, do I need special glasses? Do I need the 3D glasses on to see this?" I've never got it. I just don't get Boris at all. But there's no doubt at all he could unite the party. He's got support almost equally from Leave and Remain.
He did a pretty good job, not just in terms of getting elected in London, but as a mayor who's pretty competent. I mean, at the moment,
and the Leave campaign. I mean, there's no doubt at all. Was he necessary? I mean, again, I think he was awful as Foreign Secretary.
Why?
I think his lack of attention to detail is very, very telling, and I think his gaffe-prone sort of slapdash. My worry with Boris is that he's very clever, but he's not quite as clever as he thinks he is, and that he thinks he's too clever to have to do the work, and that's an arrogance that only somewhere like Eton could breed. I think. I'm not 100% convinced that he can have so much Remain support at the same time as so much Leave support, the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the ERG, the serious Brexiteers. I can't believe that he said the same thing to that side as that side, because that side wouldn't vote for him if he'd said what the ERG would like to hear. And every person I've interviewed on my radio show who's supporting Boris Johnson, who's a Leaver, I asked them. I asked Theresa Villiers the other day. 7 times I had to ask her, former Northern Ireland Secretary, lead campaigner. What has Boris Johnson told you about what he's going to do if and when we can't renegotiate an EU deal that can get through the Commons? Very likely. If and
He probably
when,
said it in ancient classical
well,
Greek,
yes,
so
exactly.
no one could understand.
If and when there's only no deal as an option or no Brexit, what is he going to do to stand up to the Remain-controlled Parliament? And 7 times failed to get an answer. And I don't think he has told people what he's going to do. Oh, no, don't worry, we'll get a new deal. What if we don't? No, don't worry, we'll get a new deal.
Maybe if you're going to play the long game, try and get a deal, think you're going to fail, and then prorogue Parliament, you perhaps don't want to let Parliament know quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe he's privately told the ERGers that he will do that. I don't know.
Well, if he had privately told the ERG, we would have read about it in their WhatsApp group.
You think by now? Yes, it would be released by now. I would like to know what he's saying behind the scenes, as opposed to. And he's not saying very much in public because we've barely seen him.
Changing tack slightly. Are you a feminist?
Absolutely, 100% card carrying, capital F.
Why?
Because I was raised by a feminist mother, and the idea that.
But do we still need feminism?
Well, that men and women are equal and should be treated equally, unless there are very, very good reasons not to treat them equally. As in, I'm pretty sure that men don't need care after birth, etc. Do we still need feminism? I don't think we need the kind of feminism we've got now. I suppose I've only picked the stuff up from attending a few debates, which I wouldn't do again. We don't need fourth wave feminism.
What's fourth wave feminism?
God knows, but it's something to do with us all being victims. And is
this the thing that says people with an X and a Y chromosome can compete as females?
Probably,
in the
but
Olympics?
it's a general view that women are these terribly vulnerable creatures, and things really aren't the same. And there's all these systemic battles we've got to fight. I'm a first wave feminist. Men and women are equal. I expect to do the same job as a man if I want to, and if I'm capable of it. It's not involving heavy lifting, and to be paid the same. And to be treated equally. I think this is basic stuff, and I think that 90%.
And it's a cultural norm now.
90% of people in this country are feminists, but I understand why Dominic Raab, when asked about this, didn't say he was a feminist, because actually most young women now don't identify as being a feminist. And I think that's because what they mean is they're not feministas. This sort of ongoing, whingy, moany, we're all victims. A man looked at me in the office and said, "Oh, that's a nice top." So now I've basically been raped. And that's I'm going to have counselling for 17 years and claim £1 million in compensation. I find that feminista stuff absolutely bewildering. It's not how I was brought up, but I'm constantly derided among the sisterhood because I'm not a proper feminist.
But it's interesting. The progressives used to campaign to ensure that women were treated
equally.
fairly.
Yeah.
Now you see some progressives siding with those who say that, for example, women's sports should in effect have people taking part
who are men,
who've got X and Y chromosomes.
No, who are men.
Who are men. I mean that strikes me as bizarre. If we got, say for example, Wimbledon, if you allowed the male participants to play in the women's game, it would ruin it for everyone.
I mean, this is a massive battle going on in the women's movement, such as there is a movement in terms of who thinks that being a woman is something you are born, or whether it's a state of mind, and whether it's a decision. You're a man, I'm a woman. It seems very simple to us. I completely accept there are people who grow up who feel whether they feel they are in the wrong body, that they feel they want to live a different identity. Go and do that, live your best life, have surgery, medical treatment, whatever it is, and be happy. Absolutely. And I will march in the streets for your right to be treated equally, not to be discriminated against, not to be abused. Absolutely. All of that. Hands down. But the idea that you, as a man, can say, I think I'm a woman, and you can just, as the government consultation is out currently, you can just sign a piece of paper and say,
it becomes self-identifying.
And then you can walk into not only a women's Wimbledon, but also the Topshop women's changing room with my 12-year-olds in there. Then, you know what? No chance. And the need for women-only spaces, and frankly, men-only spaces. I don't know a single man who wants to have teenage girls in the loo when they're in the loo, who wants to be in the same changing room as these people, or who wants to invade. Most men don't want to invade women's spaces. They're quite happy to respect the need of someone, a woman, for instance, who's fleeing domestic violence or a rape crisis centre, that it shouldn't be staffed by men, whether they're dressed as women or not. Men, it's with the biological assets of being a man. And I just think this is not something that is up for debate for 99% of people. Good people who would never dream of not being polite enough to, for instance, use someone's preferred pronoun. If you want to put makeup on and say, I'd like you to address me as she, I'm quite happy to do that as a matter of courtesy.
But equally in a free society,
I don't have to accept you're a woman.
But equally in a free society, you have the right to be rude and boorish.
Exactly, and I think that is the absolute crucial thing. I think we're in a situation. It's not just about the rights of women. It's also about words having meaning. No. It's about truth, and it's about not having to give in to the thought police. And people who, for whatever reason, whether for religious reasons or other reasons, say, I don't believe that a woman can become a man and a man can become a woman. The idea that is now a hate crime, to express that thought, not directed at anyone at all, but simply to write that as a social media tweet or a Facebook message, that is now, technically speaking, a hate crime.
Now, my last question, which I ask everyone, and I think it's a question that is actually at the root of much of our current malaise, both as a country but also the wider Western world. And it's, do you think that all cultures are equal?
No. I think it's really bizarre that anyone should think that. I've done a lot of travelling over the years, lived abroad as a child a bit, and been around a long time. And it is without doubt the case, as a matter of fact, in my view, rather than opinion, that the values that we have in Western democratic nations are superior to those held in non-Western democratic nations. Whether they
is that perhaps one of the reasons why lots of people who live outside
would like to come here? Yes.
And why America's been so successful at assimilating people.
Exactly. But if you look at lots of the countries, not just Western Europe, but also the Anglophile countries over the years, the Canadas, the Australias, taking on the values of the idea individual rights, the idea that it's the individual who is sovereign over their life, and that laws should only be made where you impinge on other people. The idea that you shouldn't be told what religion you have to have or face death, as in many countries around the world, if you leave that religion. You can marry who you want to marry, love who you want to love, that men and women are equal, gays and straights are equal, black and white are equal. The idea that these values are relative and should be treated as well, but it's a cultural thing in Saudi Arabia that women aren't allowed to vote or drive as they weren't for many years, and that they should go around shrouded and not have faces. But that's a cultural difference that we should respect. No, we absolutely shouldn't respect it. It's not a value, it's an insult.
What you defined as Western cultural norms today, of course, weren't.
20 or 30, 40
and so it's possible to actually improve a country's culture. It's possible for countries that don't have, frankly, good, productive cultures that respect individuals to actually improve.
Yeah. No, but I mean, there's a reason, again, why we saw the Industrial Revolution in the northern European Protestant countries, the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism, the role of the individual, their relationship with God, the notion of personal responsibility. Autonomy. There are so many different aspects where it's been quite specific to Western culture, these ideas have come about. Now, I don't believe that there is any intrinsic human right at all. Life is nasty, brutish and short, and we have as a society created this world. And I think it's something that we need to shout about, we need to celebrate, and we need to fight for democracy, fight for those values. But undoubtedly, the people who live in those societies, not just Britain, whether it's France, Germany, Sweden, America, Canada, wherever, the countries that have those values do a lot better. The people do a lot better. They live a lot longer. They're happier.
You said earlier that you're an optimist, that you think the world is getting better. And I think one of the reasons perhaps why the world is improving is because those values are spreading.
Yeah.
And when you meet people who are inherently pessimistic about the future of the world, I wonder if it's because they're cultural relativists. And if you're a cultural relativist and you don't really understand the true engine of human progress, you end up believing that actually it's going to end in catastrophic disaster.
Those values are good for individuals and they're good for countries, they're good for economies, they're good for the world. Democracies again don't go to war with each other.
And because we didn't have those cultural norms within actual living memory, it's possible for the sorts of improvements that have happened in the West to happen throughout the world.
And I think with the spread of the internet and television and films and things, of course, with that cultural soft power that the West has, I think they're spreading much more quickly than they otherwise would do. And I tell you what, I also don't believe is this idea that view during the Arab Spring that some cultures just don't lend themselves to these sort of values. And democracy is a Western. Well, I think that it's absolutely possible for those countries.
You talked earlier about Protestantism and linked it to the birth of the Industrial Revolution. There was once a time when people said that the Catholic south of Europe couldn't industrialise for that. We all know that's nonsense. In fact, industrialisation has spread throughout Europe, irrespective of religion. I wonder if perhaps our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren might look back at a world where what we assumed were distinctively Western values actually become global.
I mean, I certainly hope they do, and I think it's something we should push. I'm not necessarily sure that we should go around sort of castigating every country that's a few decades behind us, maybe some hundreds of years behind us on that scale. But I think we should be having an open debate about it. And certainly when people are in this country, I'm very much of the view, if you want to come and live in this country and make this country your home and raise your children here, you will
there are certain cultural norms,
values about women's rights, being able to marry someone you want, equality of gays and straights and black and white. And if you do not accept those values, then there are plenty of countries where you can live a nasty, bigoted life if you want, or you can live a life where your daughters are basically you own them, they're your property. If that's where you want to go and live, then go and do so. But you're not doing it here.
I would actually go even slightly further, and I would say if public money is being used in education, education has to educate pupils about what you might call the Darwinian discoveries. That's not to say that you can have your own creationist beliefs if you want, but you have to educate children to understand that the natural world, and I would say the economic and social world, came about through a process of self-organisation.
I think it's, and I think that so much of this, again, coming back to that pessimistic view of the world, is a sort of an embarrassment, a shame about our values, and because especially I think, I was brought up an atheist, but and still am, and raising my daughter as an atheist, but my parents come from one Catholic, one Methodist, but it's very interesting that sort of almost that C of E sort of. You know, there's no shouting about your religion. It's all just something you do very quietly, maybe-ish on a Sunday morning, but maybe not. And everyone's very quiet about it. And just because people aren't shouting about a lot of those values, and even as an atheist, I'm fully aware that a lot of my values come from that Judeo-Christian culture that has created this country. We don't shout about it, and we don't celebrate it, and we don't. And when there is a clash, as we've seen the school in Birmingham, where there have been protests by conservative Muslims outside a school demonstrating against the teaching of children, not sex education, but simply the fact that there are gay people in the world and they're just the same as straight people and to be treated accordingly. Just that simple fact. If they had been Christian evangelicals, I think the left would be much happier about criticising them. Because they're Muslim, everyone's a bit wary of it, because it's seen as a cultural difference. And we make these excuses. And I think we need to be much more bullish about celebrating the values that we have decided, not one political party, but we have decided as a nation, our political representatives, and largely the polling shows that people have gone with them, that we treat people as equal who are gay or straight, that is the law of the land. It's not up for debate, it's the law of the land. Why don't we celebrate that, and why don't we champion it?
So in the public space, we've got to have these shared values to work as a country.
And we can argue about things on the margins, but I think we should be prouder about it, and we shouldn't have the view that if someone feels strongly in another direction, that we need to respect that. I respect your right to hold those views. I do not respect your right to exercise those in action in this country.
Very last final question. We've talked about how attitudes change, cultural values change, attitudes towards women's rights, attitudes towards the way we treat animals and all the rest of it change. Is there something we do today that you think your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren will look at and think, how on earth did Aunt Julia
What were you thinking?
What were you thinking?
Yeah, you'll be the embarrassing grandma saying, you know what she...
We used to eat meat.
Yes, I have a funny feeling the meat one might be coming up. Yeah, I think we probably are going to move towards cruelty-free meat.
But science can actually create, not meat substitute, authentic lab-grown meat.
Meat. It will be meat. It just won't. There won't have to be an animal that was slaughtered to do it. I'd be perfectly happy with that. I do like a steak and a sausage and bacon sandwich.
I'm with you on that. I like steak, but if someone can create a lab-grown alternative, I'd be.
I think one of the things you really notice when you look at developing countries is the treatment of women and then the treatment of children, the treatment of animals, and these things they go down the list. So I think we will see some changes.
I think also the environment. I suspect that actually, as we get richer, people are going to want to see more of the countryside restored to, rewilded. I think.
Do you know what I think quite differently? I think one of the biggest, most interesting things that's going to be happening over the next 20, 30 years is the public waking up to the green blob. And
you think so?
Yeah, absolutely. Because every time I interview someone on my show about what the net zero emissions, by all means, let's absolutely clean up pollution and let's try and move away from fossil fuels and cleaner fuels. I think we'll do that anyway. I think again,
technology.
The technology it's what happens. And as long as you don't even have to subsidise it, you just create an environment where it can happen with the entrepreneurial spirit and innovation. But I do think virtually everything that the green movement is looking at is we're going to tax you to eat meat, we're going to tax you to fly, we're going to tax you to your car, you're going to have to sell your old car, we're going to tax you buying fast food, we're going to tax, and basically it's all going to, when we're all sitting in our dark, cold houses, wearing the same pair of shoes for the next 6 years,
having collected
and
some
not being allowed
firewood
to go on holiday anywhere but Scarborough, I have a funny feeling the British people might feel differently about it.
Yes and no. I mean, I do just wonder if, take for example, fish. A few generations ago, people used to hunt the meat they wanted.
Yeah.
I wonder if in 20, 30 years' time, we might look back and think, why didn't they just farm fish? Fish farming will displace this idea that you go and
a lot of it is, isn't it?
Increasingly so.
Yeah, but then the animal rights people get upset about that. They're always going to move the line, aren't they?
Yeah. Julia, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on. We went completely off script and talked about a whole range of things, but it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.